So it's much more around how do you get better utilization? It's not net new spend. Companies don't have net new spend. And so it's how do you get much more efficient with the money you are going to spend and reach far more people? And a lot of times companies have really great programs. But when they start looking at utilization, it's usually around 3 to 5% per thing that you're offering. It is very low. And so when you're spending across each individual thing and getting incredibly low utilization, that's a tough sell to a CFO who is like, okay, how do we reach more people and keep more people engaged with something like this and not cut that benefit? That's when companies start looking towards stipends where you could say, hey, we support family or we support wellness, but you're no longer dictating what vendors an employee has to use for that. It really allows every employee to make the decisions that are best for them. So you get much higher engagement, much happier people, and HR is no longer having to dive 3 layers deep on somebody's personal life to figure out exactly what's going on there.
Amy Spurling is the founder and CEO of Compt, an HR software company that enables companies to offer personalized, globally inclusive, and fully tax-compliant employee lifestyle benefits. Amy's experience as a former CFO and COO drives her belief that companies and employees can achieve much more together when employees are fully supported. A seasoned executive with nearly 20 years of experience in leadership roles at venture-backed companies, Amy has also closed over 10 rounds of financing, totaling more than $200 million, and managed 2 acquisitions to close. Amy received her Master's of Business Administration from the Simmons School of Management and a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Rochester. Amy, welcome to Voices of HR.
Thanks so much for having me.
So this is going to be an exciting conversation because you have sat in the C-suite as a COO, as a CFO, and CHROs need your type of help, right? To actually garner the support that they need to execute on these types of benefits that we're going to talk about today. So let's start here. So the competition obviously is incredibly fierce to attract and retain talent. I hear it in every conversation I think that I have with the C-suite. But what you're talking about is benefits that go beyond health insurance or kind of the standardized benefits that other companies offer. What does it take for an organization to really stand out today if they really want to attract and retain the top talent?
And it's interesting because it's any talent. Like, one, I don't believe in, A talent and B talent. I think every person is of value. You just have to put them in the right organization. So if they're not doing well, then they're probably in the wrong organization. But companies are trying to figure out across industries, how do we differentiate ourselves? And so that's where we've seen salaries get a lot more competitive, and companies that were lagging have started kind of bumping that up, which is great. Health insurance is obviously table stakes. We do see a lot of movement on the return to office, hybrid, remote work side of things. That's a really good way to retain folks and make, be a really good retention tool. And then companies also get into the what else. And that's where it's usually the smallest part of compensation, but it's the one that moves the needle the most, outside of assuming you have competitive salaries, of course. And that's where companies find everything from, fertility benefits to childcare to student loan repayment to food to you name it, there's a thing there. And they're trying to use that to compete for talent and retain folks. So when you're looking at really large companies, they'll have a list of literally thousands of things employees could use. But the challenge is that it's noise and employees check out and they're not using any of it. And so it doesn't actually solve the purpose that companies originally put them in for, which is why we wanted to start Compt to try and reach more people.
So one of the things I suspect that is the first challenge to a CHRO who maybe brings this to the table and says, okay, we offer all these benefits and we're spending all of this money, but we're not seeing utilization the way that we thought that we would. And because more isn't always better, right?
Right.
So some of the first challenge that they get is you're already spending the money. So now you want more money, or you want to spend it differently. And so they get the challenge from the CFO. You've sat in that seat. So help us help our HR folks that are listening
Absolutely.
today. What is the challenge that you typically see, and what is the response?
I mean, it's usually, I was a CFO in 2008. I cut the heck out of a lot of things, and I was doing it to try and save jobs because I had to cut somewhere. And so it was like, let me see how many jobs I can save. And so I did cut a lot of things, but the world was different in 2008.
Yeah.
Unemployment was much higher. I wasn't having to compete for talent like folks are now. And so the conversation we see happening between CFOs and CHROs right now is much more around more efficient spend. So sure, you're spending a lot of money on a lot of things. How many people is that impacting? I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with a company that was thinking about putting in a $2 million gym. It was going to impact 100 lives. That's it. 100 people. And they're going to put in a $2 million gym. And I'm talking to them like, okay, your CFO is probably not going to like that. That is a very expensive benefit when you have a 7,000 person team that you're trying to reach. This just doesn't move the needle and is very expensive. So it's much more around how do you get better utilization? It's not net new spend. Companies don't have net new spend. And so it's how do you get much more efficient with the money you are going to spend and reach far more people?
So let's get down to what exactly it is that we're talking about, because we're talking about benefits, and we're talking about the fact that we have 5 generations in the workforce, all expecting something different. And offering more isn't always better. It is about the efficiency. Can you take us through the process that companies are going through to come to the realization that maybe they do need a more efficient spend and that this is what could actually work at their organization?
The first layer that we see companies go through is kind of like an inventory or an audit where they're looking at what they're spending money on. And a lot of times companies have really great programs. So, you've got everything from these fertility benefits to, student loan repayment to could be pet insurance. Like there's any number of things they could have in place. But when they start looking at utilization, it's usually around 3 to 5% per thing that you're offering. It is very low. And so when you're spending across each individual thing and getting incredibly low utilization, that's a really tough place to play because you're just not going to reach your whole team. You have 1,000 person team, you go and you've got these amazing fertility benefits and 3 people take advantage. That's a tough sell to a CFO who is like, okay, how do we reach more people and keep more people engaged with something like this and not cut that benefit? That's when companies start looking towards stipends. And we saw this movement during COVID when there weren't places for you to go. You couldn't go to the gym. And so companies started rethinking the entire concept and entire approach, which is where stipends really started crystallizing for folks where you could say, hey, we support family or we support wellness, but you're no longer dictating what vendors an employee has to use for that. So family could mean some sort of fertility benefits. It may not though. Maybe it means something for your aging parents. Maybe you don't have children. Maybe it's for something for you and your partner. It really allows every employee to define who's in their family and what's in their family and make the decisions that are best for them. So you get much higher engagement, much happier people. And HR is no longer having to dive 3 layers deep on somebody's personal life to figure out exactly what's going on there. Because quite frankly, HR doesn't want to, and it's not the role that a company should play, in my opinion. It's how do we retain folks and how do we support the things that align with our culture? And so it just allows for a much broader usage.
So do they take a portion of the benefits package that they are currently spending and then transition it to, I guess, personalized benefits? Do they still have a core benefits program and then a stipends benefit program, or is it all one?
Typically, this would be outside of all the insurances. It's not going to take the place for health insurance. Some really small companies that don't have a state requirement to offer health insurance may use it to help offset some of those costs, but those are very small companies. The vast majority of companies are either offering health insurance or no health insurance, but may have this to sit next to that regardless, because they're trying to do something out of the box, trying to do something that is impactful, that can reach a lot of people, be a lot more inclusive to a much more diverse team. because, think about professional development. You and I are at a different stage of our careers than a 22-year-old coming out of college. Right. Doesn't mean that we don't want, professional development, but what it means for us is going to be very different from people at different parts of their career journey. Mm-hmm. And so allowing for that to happen without a company having to say, okay, from the ages of 22 to 25, you get this. From 25 to 28, mm-hmm. you get this. Like, that's just, it's not functional. And so this allows for a much broader appeal and much better utilization, and can be on a lower budget as well, which is really interesting. We see a lot of companies shrink their budgets through this, but still have so much more impact because employees have that choice.
Because it's the efficiency.
It's the efficiency.
Better
You think about like
dollars.
A lot of companies will put in a gym benefit and say, hey, we signed up. We got this discounted gym you can go to. It's up the street. Employees will take advantage. They're going to sign up because it's cheap or it's free. They may never go. They're like, well, I guess it's better than not having the benefit. That doesn't make them actually go there. Whereas if you use that same money and put it towards a wellness benefit, they're going to find something that is meaningful to them because they don't want to throw away their own money either. They'll throw away your money. They don't want to throw away their own money. This makes it to where you're actually getting those outcomes of trying to have a healthier team, of having people more engaged because they have so much more, ability to direct how that impacts their lives.
Mm-hmm. And I would suspect when companies select which benefits are going to be in this personalized package, that they I guess I have some assumptions. I would think about brand, right? What are we trying to convey both externally and internally to our employees? Cost, obviously, age group, generations of employees. But can you walk us through how do they make the decision to select the portfolio of benefits for employees to choose from?
So there's no vendors, quite intentionally. Whether I build a list of vendors that an employees could use or HR builds it, it's the same list, quite frankly. That's not going to get you the outcomes either. The way to think about it is that companies they say, hey, we want to support wellness or family or just be all inclusive. And they're building something that aligns with their culture. They're setting a budget. They're saying, hey, you've got $100 this quarter, or you've got $1,000 a month, or whatever their budget is. And then employees go and spend where they want. So if you and I each had $100 quarterly wellness budget, you could go spend it wherever you want it. Maybe there is a gym you want. Maybe it's yoga. Maybe, for me, maybe it's a mental health app or vitamins or I don't know, some other thing that impacts my life. But we can shop at totally different places because it doesn't have to be on a short list. What we find is that short list of vendors isn't going to get you the utilization you're looking for. And we built optimizing for that. If you have a marketplace, you usually see 30 to 40% utilization. So it's better than the individual perks, but it's still pretty low. What we found through our data is that on average, every employee has 3 unique vendors they would like to use. So what that meant was we studied 8,700 people and they used 27,000 different vendors. That's how you would get to 90+% utilization. You can't build a program like that.
Yeah. What benefits are employees using the most? And is it generational? Is it male, female, transgender? Are you seeing any type of utilization by any particular group?
What we see is that the most common type of stipend companies put in place are wellness. That is by far the most common that a company is going to put in place because it has benefits for their team, obviously, but also for the company. If your team is healthier, happier, they're more likely to be engaged. You have lower absenteeism. Within that, though, there aren't trends that we're seeing across any of those demographics. What we see is that every employee is a very unique person and that they all want very, very different things. And that is the beauty of personalization, is that you can have so many different types of, even within one category, ability to support people in different parts of the country, in different parts of the world, and making it to where, for people who don't want to go to the gym and don't think about wellness in that way, maybe it's a healthy meal delivery system. Well, there's 100 of those you could use. If there's vitamins or prenatal vitamins or hiking boots or ski lessons. Like we just see such a broad use case that every person's doing on average 3 different things. So not a lot of trend line on that.
Mm. And so you've referred to your research. You conduct your own research within your own proprietary research within your organization. What were some other ahas that maybe you didn't expect?
One of the coolest ones that we've seen is that, we started building this with the goal of having really high employee engagement. Because if employees aren't using it, in my opinion, CFOs shouldn't pay for it. It's an expensive, window dressing. You can say you do things without actually impacting people's lives. That's a waste of money. What we found though was because so many people were using their own unique vendors, that all this money that companies were investing a lot of times goes to local providers. If you have a big marketplace, you're going to have big box names. You're going to have the multinationals, the usual folks that you're going to find in a big marketplace, the Amazons of the world. When people can buy and have their own purchasing power, they buy local. And so all this money that companies are investing in their team is then being spent locally where they live. And so companies, without doing any extra, are supporting these communities from the ground up. That was such a huge, amazing aha moment for us when it wasn't what we were designing for, but a really positive impact that we're seeing.
That is amazing. That is amazing. Was there anything that that maybe was a challenge for some individuals that you then ended up changing up in your offer?
Most of it, it's really dictated by what the IRS allows and doesn't allow for fringe benefits. We have added over time as companies have come up with, sustainability as being an important initiative for them. And originally we didn't have that. Co-working became much bigger, over the last 2-3 years. Whereas when we started in 2018, it wasn't as big of a deal. And so we have been pushed by our customers to add some things, which has been great. We've also made adjustments based on the way people are interacting with each other. So adding peer recognition and overall team recognition to where it's not just about my benefits. It's about how I'm recognizing other people. And that we really built in partnership with our HR leaders. And it's been really powerful to see the impact that's had, especially in distributed teams.
I love the evolution of the offer. That's amazing. Can you give us an example of an organization, maybe the CHRO was bought in, but they brought you in and you actually help her or him change the minds of the C-suite, and you did that successfully and it ended up becoming a successful program?
Yeah, I can give you an example. There was one company we were working with. The CHRO had brought us in, and they were actually already a customer of ours. And then through the last couple of years, they brought in a new CFO who out of the gate was like, nope, cutting it. This doesn't make sense. And I was like, we need to chat. Let's chat about these things. And got on the phone with him along with the team. I was like, look, let's talk about what your concerns are. And his concerns were like, oh my gosh, it seems like there's a ton of money being spent. We've got to be able to do this in a cheaper way. And I said, well, for one thing, you can actually reduce your stipends and still offer the same breadth to the team. So if you have to shrink your overall budget, you can still say, hey, instead of $100 a month, you get, $50 a month, but you still have the same breadth of benefits. You're not taking away any benefits. And if you move to any other type of offering, you're cutting actual benefits, and you're going to lose the people who those are the most important things to them. So you're going to have a retention problem. And we talked through that. And he was like, okay, yep, I get it. He was concerned about the taxability. And I also talked him through that because he hadn't had a lot of exposure to our platform. I was like, no, literally taxes run through this thing. Like that's my CFO brain. It requires everything be taxed correctly. And so they've now been our customer, I think for 4 years. And it's been great. And we've got a great working relationship with the CFO. But the first interaction was, nope, time to cut it. And I was like, hold on, let's chat. Let's see if maybe it is, but let's talk about it first to understand your concerns.
Yeah. It always feels like, and I think it is true, that is the first reaction of most. But now let's flip this around. So now for those organizations who are offering these personalized benefits, these portfolio of benefits, and giving employees the flexibility to spend where it makes the most impact for them, have you seen increased retention? Have you seen increased maybe engagement? Or like, what are some of the measurement tools that you use? Or that the employer should use?
Yeah, there's a few different things. One, we can't take credit for overall employee retention, any benefits. I mean, if you're doing layoffs because your company is in dire straits, like there's nothing you're going to offer through our platform that's going to solve for that. Right. But what we can measure and what we do look at is if you have competitive salaries, if you do have competitive health insurance, and you're trying to figure out how to retain folks in a steady state, one, what does that look like? And two, what does the engagement level of these actual benefits look like? So if you were bringing in a student loan forgiveness provider, a fertility app, a childcare app, whatever it is, and you had 3 to 5% utilization, we actually want to see north of 80% utilization. And we typically see over 90% utilization. So comparing the options, if you're going to spend, what's going to be most efficient? That's one of the things we look at. We've also surveyed the employees that use our platform. And what came back was that 65% of them said that they were more likely to stay at their current employer because of this benefit. So not just because they're, happy with their employer overall, but specifically because they had this benefit offering. So we are seeing where this is moving the needle for employers and taking it out. If you're down to your last dollar, you got to do what you got to do. But if you don't, it's what's the alternative? How are you going to spend more efficiently and reach more people on your team? And there really isn't another way.
I don't know if I've ever heard of a 90% utilization on any ancillary benefit.
I've never heard that. And so that is up and down kind of employee size as well. We're working with a 15,000 person hospital in the Midwest. So nurses not behind computers all day. Within the first 3 months of their program, they hit 90% utilization. And it has stayed that high for the last year. Like it's not even one of those, hey, we use it and then you drop off type of things too, because I want to make sure that people are happy over time as well. And it's just, when do you ever see that type of utilization in a population that big? It's been incredible to see.
That's amazing. That is amazing. 90%. I'm curious on this one because you've mentioned student loan repayment a couple of different times. How many firms are using it, are considering it? Is it kind of the next big trend? Because all I keep hearing from this younger generation is they're afraid. They're afraid that they aren't going to have the money, that they're going to have to live with their parents until they're 35 because they don't have the money.
Right. It's so fascinating because, people who are trying to put a 401k in place and things like that, that's a great benefit. But if people can't afford their rent and they can't afford their student loan debt, they're not saving for retirement. Like that is something that is, out there someday. We do see a fair number of companies use that category within us. It is very different from using a student loan forgiveness provider. The way those look is that oftentimes employees have to sign up with this provider, refinance their loans through them. They're usually attached to a particular bank. Like there's a lot of hurdles to jump through to even be able to use that. Whereas with our platform, companies can include it. Say they wanted to include a family stipend and what your family needed was, financial wellness, or even a wellness stipend and include financial wellness. If you have student loans, you could get reimbursed for that. All you have to do is show that you proof that you paid your loans and you can get reimbursed. But somebody who doesn't have loans could then use it for emotional wellness or physical wellness instead. So allowing for that flexibility without having yet another thing you're trying to put out there, because even student loan forgiveness, you're going to see 3 to 5% utilization if you bring something like that in-house.
Yeah, I just think it's such an interesting benefit to offer.
It is.
And that really is personalizing. That's really thinking about who you're trying to attract and retain as well. Are there any other ones that pop to the top that are new or newer that employers are starting to consider that employees maybe are bringing to the table?
We're seeing a lot more green initiatives and sustainability. a lot more things around that as people want to see that their companies are supporting more environmental causes, or at least supporting, doing something good for the environment in some way, shape, or form. So we are seeing a lot more of that as that becomes more and more, every winter we're going to see more bad storms, more bad things happening. That's when employees get very vocal. And that's when employers start looking to things like that. So that has been a really big trend. As more companies have a push to return to office, we're also seeing a lot more of the family stipends come in place, where people are trying to figure out childcare. If you were, 10 minutes from your daycare before, but now you have to commute an hour into the office, you've got a situation. And that's a really hard one for families to work around. And they need extra support. And so we're seeing a lot more movement as companies try and get those folks back into the office for that extra aftercare hours, support and care.
Yeah. And for those organizations, I'm sure you read this stat as well as I did during the pandemic. 40% of women in childbearing years, took some time off of the workplace. And employers, that's a very difficult challenge if you aren't part of the solution.
Exactly. Part of the challenge, a lot of companies, I believe, would like to have more diverse teams. I don't think that most companies set out and say, hey, we want to be really homogenous. But when their benefits only support certain groups at certain age levels within certain demographics, even if it's just people who are within driving range or, within commuting range of an office, that's a very specific demographic. And so if you want to actually support a diverse team, you need to have something that allows people to have more access to that. And you can do that without having to get into, hey, do you need a bus pass versus a, commuter rail pass versus, maybe you need more flexibility from home. This is a way to manage that without getting into the weeds on it. Yeah, so as an example, one of the women who started the company with me, we have a wellness stipend here. She started out using it for 5Ks and running shoes and like all of her entrance fees. And then she got pregnant and she started using it for prenatal vitamins and Lamaze class and all the baby things. And then she had the baby and she transitioned again. As an employer, I did nothing. I had to do nothing. All I did was have this wellness stipend in place that she could use. But for her, she could go on her own journey and I could support that as she went through her own personal journey. That to me is a more appropriate relationship between an employer and an employee rather than me saying, okay, so when like getting into the weeds of your personal life of what you personally need, especially when it gets to mental health and to physical health as well. Employees need to work with professionals. I'm here to support in some way.
Without dictating.
Exactly.
Exactly. What about L&D? What trends are you seeing? Because, the one thing that I'm hearing is that large organizations, most organizations understand that they need to invest, particularly in Gen Z. They are requiring it as one of their parts of their benefits package. And so organizations are trying to kind of figure out what that looks like. Do you have any best practices that you could share?
So it's interesting because professional development stipends and professional development in general are usually the lowest utilization benefit, lowest utilized benefit in an organization. Yeah. And what we found is that companies that have smaller to mid-sized budgets, think $500 to $1,500 per employee per year, do much, much better than companies that offer massive budgets, think $20,000 per employee per year. It's overwhelming to employees to sit there and go, oh my gosh, I've got this huge amount of money sitting out there. What am I going to do? I don't even know what can get approved. And they go into shutdown mode. Versus if you have a smaller budget, what we see is that people are like, okay, that's manageable. They'll work with their manager, think about what types of online courses maybe they want to take, things that cost a lot less, books that they want to read around management or a different skill set. It makes it much more tangible and much less daunting. And we're seeing that moves the needle and is obviously a benefit for companies as well. It's no company is expecting everyone to spend $25,000 a year, of course, right. A tuition reimbursement, but that isn't always the goal anymore. Like your next degree isn't necessarily what's going to move the needle on your career. What we're finding is that you can do a lot more with a lot less. And that makes it much more accessible to a lot of employees.
Are you seeing the offer is different between the executive ranks and
Mm.
so let's say non-salaried, salaried even?
It depends on the company. It depends on the industry. I mean, we do
Mm.
see differences there. Within salaried and hourly employees, when we look at, retail or
Mhm.
construction or, even some of the hospital systems, things like that, we do see a bit of a difference. A lot of times, if it's a lower wage worker, the
Mhm.
needs are different. So they may still put a wellness stipend in place. They may still
Sure.
put a family stipend in place, but the use cases end up being a bit different. One, the company is likely trying to retain the person for 3 to 6 months longer than they were otherwise. You look at a retail chain, 200% turnover per year versus a tech company, which is probably 20% turnover per year.
Right.
You've got a different type of dynamic you're trying to shift. So it'll be smaller dollars, but it'll be at increments to try and increase that retention. And a lot of times the use cases could be things like backup childcare, could be things like, meals, could be, it gets a lot closer to human needs, because if you're making $15 an hour, quite frankly, you're below the poverty level, and you probably need some support. And it's not about, hey, where could I go skydiving? There's a lot more practical things that you're trying to solve for in your house.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's interesting. So that garners the question then, do you or people on your team have these strategic conversations with the CHROs and maybe even the C-suite to help them identify what portfolio package would be best for them?
We do. We work with every single company, regardless of size, actually, to figure out we start with their outcomes. What are you trying to drive? Do you need a healthier team? Are you trying to align with your culture? Are you trying to retain folks? Is it about hiring? And then help them craft the program. And it really doesn't have to correlate to a specific budget. Higher budget doesn't mean higher retention. It doesn't mean higher utilization even. It's all about the structure and design of the program. And we go through with every single company and work through that with them to make sure that it's tailored to their individual needs and their own company design. If you've got everybody within, one general market, everybody's based in the Atlanta area, that's very different from somebody who's like, hey, I got people in 20 states, or even more, like we've got companies that have people in 20 countries. That's a very different scenario. And so we need to work with them to make sure that their program is crafted to support their team, regardless of, the way their team is structured.
And how long does it typically take for that part of the exercise to occur versus then how long does it typically take for execution? And can you give us a flavor for a little bit of what that looks like?
Sure. A lot of it's driven by the company. I mean, if they are at square one and don't know, well, if they've made it through the sales process, they have a budget. They know they have a budget. So they're going to be spending money with folks. And then it's usually a couple of conversations with our customer success team. The actual implementation itself is usually 30 to 45 minutes. So it's very, very, very fast. But leading up to that is what do you want to call your program? Do you need it segmented by different groups? Do you want to have different amounts for different groups of people? Is it different countries? And it's getting answers to those questions, but they don't have to craft anything in the software. It's very much a turnkey solution, because this goes back to kind of my founder battle scars, as a former CFO. If I do one more HRIS, switch and implementation, I don't want to, I just don't want to. It's really hard and painful. So it has to be easy for HR, and we do all the heavy lifting for them.
Got it. So end to end, if the CHR knows really what they're striving for, what the end goal is, realistically, this could be completed in 3 months?
No, nobody takes that long. 2 weeks, 3 weeks?
2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah, nobody takes 3 months. That's way too long. And so even that large hospital group we were talking about, their program was so fast. Because we could go in, we knew it needed to be for wellness. We had talked about they have different levels of folks that they needed to, nurses moving in and out of full-time, part-time, and setting that up. But it's usually over the course of a couple of weeks for, a beginning of month launch. So it's very, very fast.
And what does the employee communication look like? And is that handled at all by your team or just in the internal comms team?
It depends on the company. We definitely handle a large portion of it. How much they want to be involved is up to the company. Usually there's some sort of an internal announcement that they're doing, and we build collateral for them and, help them make it pretty and do all of those things. And then once the employees are invited, which happens through our software, we take over. So all that communication happens through us and is automated. So people know they have the new, the new benefit. They know, when their new stipend is live, when to submit, all of those things. So, we've got a 98% account activation rate. Payroll's the only thing with a better activation rate. People are like, okay, yep, I get it. This is where, push the button, get the treat. I like these things. And so it makes it very easy for them.
I'm getting excited, like, for these people, right? I mean, I can see why there's such high utilization and engagement because it matters to me.
Right. The impact can be huge. And you get into the personal situations that you can see that HR is supporting. So things like, there was a guy, and I've told this story probably too many times. My team has heard me talk about it because it gives me chills each time. It was the beginning of the pandemic in San Francisco, and everybody was in lockdown at home. Kids were home, homeschooling, the whole thing. And one of the employees for one of our customers had his hot water heater blow. So he had 2 kids at home running around, like trying to figure out, are we all going to die? And now you have no hot water on top of it. And he was able to use his family stipend to offset the cost of getting a new hot water heater replaced. Like, that is not a benefit that a company is being like, hey, we should have a hot water heater benefit, unless you're a hot water heater company. And so you're sitting there and you're like, okay, that's what his family needed at that moment in time. And that is something he is absolutely going to remember. And it just gets very personal and makes a very different connection for folks than if it's like, okay, I don't know, like maybe I'll get another grill. It just changes the dynamic between employer and employee when people feel supported in a way that matters to them and to their lives.
And you made it so easy for them to love their employer.
We try. I mean, the employers are doing the right things. It comes down to the company culture, and it comes down to the way companies operate. If they're even going to put something like this in place, if they want to control and say, hey, it can only be this gym on this corner, you could do that.
Right.
Your goals are different from ours. Companies that are thinking, ahead of the curve, realize they can do this with less money and get so much more engagement from their team. It's just so much more impactful.
Yeah, this sounds like exactly those organizations who want to get ahead of the trend.
Right.
Absolutely, because this is going to be big. I mean,
it
isn't already. Yeah, this is the way forward for employees.
It's easier for everyone. How can it not be the way of the future, right? Like, why are we making it so hard on ourselves? Employees know what they want. Employers know what they can afford. Like, let's just make it easy.
They do. And as we all know, there's a talent shift going on, and it is tough out there. You have to find the right talent for your organization. So, okay, well, we could keep talking, I'm sure, for hours, but we are ending the normal portion of our conversation. And now we're going to move into something called rapid fire questions. So these are 1-sentence questions with 1-sentence answers. Are you willing to play?
I am.
All right, let's do this. What is the biggest problem you and your team solved this last year?
What we were able to solve was the way we interacted with our partners. So we work with payroll providers and making it to where it's much easier for them to interact with us.
Love it. When you get overwhelmed, how do you refocus?
Go for a walk.
If you could build your own billboard that would reach millions of people, what would your message be?
I would say thank you next. Because I think employees are like, if you're not going to do the things that impact me, I'm moving down the street.
Never heard that before. That's awesome. What are you currently reading, or what have you read recently that you could recommend?
So 2 questions. Reading currently, I Hear You Paint Houses. So it's the story of who killed Jimmy Hoffa. It's fascinating. And It's the actual real story. And then the one I'd recommend is Retention Revolution by Erica Keswin. It's recently released, fantastic book about retaining employees. A huge fan.
Love it. What move did you make that had the biggest positive impact on your career?
Starting a company.
The higher you go, the more strategic acumen you need to exhibit. What is the best way for aspiring CHROs to build their strategic acumen muscle?
I think learning to get really comfortable in the numbers.
Why should CEOs give HR the credibility they so deserve?
They're the leader that is sitting over 85% of an organization's costs. Not listening to them seems pretty silly.
Take note from a prior CFO. What is one of the best or most worthwhile investments you've ever made in your career? And it could be an investment of money, time, energy, anything.
I made an angel investment about 4 years ago in a company that ended up with COVID going out of business, but their COO and their head of engineering were phenomenal, and I got them to join Compt. And so
there you go.
It's a very good $10,000 investment.
There you go. What is the main takeaway you want to leave our listeners with?
Employees really do each need something different. Personalization is really key if you want to support your team in a way that is really inclusive.
Where can people go to learn more about you and Compt?
You can go to our website, www.compt.io, or they can reach out to me at amy@compt.io.
Today, we have been joined by Amy Spurling, founder and CEO of Compt. Thank you again for joining me, Amy. It has been such a pleasure.
Thank you.
I really hope you enjoyed this episode. Thanks so much for watching. We would love it if you shared your thoughts on any of the topics we discussed in the comments below. And if you got value from the video, it would mean the world to us if you hit the like button and subscribe to the HRMorning channel. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Voices of HR.